This video is part of a series on experiences of the Enneagram from the 27 subtypes. I'm aiming to interview people of each subtype, so you get to hear and experience what those different voices and life experiences sound like. I hope you enjoy. Hi Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to share with us today. Can you share the country that you live in, your Enneagram type, subtype, and instinctual sequence?
Sure. I live in Minnesota in the US of A. So we are colder and we get a lot more snow than you all in the UK. I am an Enneagram 7. I am a social 7 for a subtype, and I have an instinctual sequence where 7 is the dominant, self-prize is next, and then I have sexual repressed.
Thank you, Rachel. So
Yeah.
when it comes to the Enneagram, when did you first hear about it?
I first heard about it, I think back in like 2008. And so it's been about 15 years I've been working with it. Um, and back then, there just wasn't quite as much information as we have now, but it was still really pivotal in my growth. It gave me a level of self awareness that I think I didn't have before. And I really appreciated that. Before that, I was really into the Myers-Briggs. I don't know if you know that one.
I do, I love it.
But 16 personalities, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I just found it super helpful for both myself, like knowing where my strengths and my weaknesses were, but then also for having empathy for other people, and just that, we all have these strengths and weaknesses. And so it helped me to like kind of define that for myself, to be kinder to others about theirs. But the Enneagram gave it like a deeper level, and it went deeper, like toward like motivation and just deeper things in my heart. So right away, I think I was hooked,
Okay.
and started with working with it that way before I knew more things.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, Rachel. I must admit, my story is very similar. I was very much into the Myers-Briggs,
Yeah.
and I'm still into it. I think it's a great system. But when the
Mhm.
Enneagram came along, it was, Myers-Briggs was dropped, and I was like, the Enneagram. So it sounds
What's
like it
your
was
Myers
similar
Briggs
for you.
type?
INFP.
Okay, I'm an ENFP, so we're similar
Okay.
that way.
Yeah. So what's been your experience generally over the years or since 2008, since
Sure.
discovering the Enneagram? Like, what's been your experience with it?
Okay. Um, so for a lot of years, I worked with the Big Blue Book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram, because that was the one I think that was the most prevalent at that time. And so I would go in kind of cycles where I'd pay a lot of attention to Enneagram, and then I'd kind of drift off into my other things, and then I'd come
Mm.
back to it. And maybe that's, part of the personality of a 7, right? We have all sorts of interests. So, but that it was a continual thread that would pop up every so often. It was super helpful in my marriage. It was super helpful with my kids. We actually started looking for our kids' kind of personalities through both Myers-Briggs and Enneagram. Not like with a rock solid approach, but more like oh, that's interesting. And I think it
Mm.
helped us parent in a way that was a little more graceful than I would have been otherwise. Let me just say I wasn't the most graceful parent, and I do a lot of like um, try repairing now that my kids are all adults. But I think that helped give us a little extra grace. Also, I found when I was struggling, I would come back to it to try to work out what was going on, and where could I maybe have another layer of growth next. I really love that image of like the spiral or the onion, how we just keep going back to some of the same things, but we get deeper in levels. And so I feel like that's kind of what it helped me do for quite a long time. And then in well, last March actually, so March of 2022, because we're in 23 now. I decided I wanted to get some certification in the Enneagram. I'm a therapist. I use it in my work, but I just wanted a little extra like knowledge and professionalism with it. So I found the CP Enneagram certification course. And I had read Beatrice's book, the big book with all of the words about the Enneagram. But I was having trouble sussing out kind of what was my subtype and what is that even about, really. And so the course that we had to watch before we started that process helped me discover that I was a social seven. And that discovery, and then the subsequent learning from that through the classes, through retreats, has probably been the biggest thing in my personal growth in years. And
Mm,
so that in itself really impacted who I am, how I look at that Enneagram, how I look at myself in the world. And so I'd say the last year and a half has been so rich. And I've been so grateful that I stumbled, really did stumble into it, kind of in that way that for a while I thought, well, maybe this is just a seven trying to like grab everything I can. Let's do this
mm.
certification. But it definitely was bigger than that. It was, I think, a guiding, a leading. It's changed a lot in my world, and so I'm very, very grateful that I stumbled there. I've done the process in the last year and a half because I think it's opened my world up, and
Mm.
again, given me more layers and more depth in my work, my inner work, as well as my work with my clients. So it's been very, very important in my world. I
Mm.
just want to ask, how about you, Matt? But I know I'm here to answer your questions.
Yeah, well, I can resonate with what you're sharing there because basically the overall what you shared has been very helpful in your personal life and in
Mm-hmm.
your professional life, and it's especially when the subtype piece came on, on board, and that's
Mm-hmm.
been extremely true for me as well. It's been extremely helpful in my personal life,
Mm-hmm.
extremely helpful in my professional life. But
Mm-hmm.
it's a journey.
Yeah,
It is a journey, and it's not necessarily an easy one. It's not
mm-hmm.
necessarily a pain-free one, but
I agree.
it's a good one in the sense that it's worthwhile work. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's it's worthwhile. Yeah,
Yes, and I would say that I totally agree with that, and my clients do as well. I
yeah,
mean, that's not always pain free, but it is worth it.
yeah.
So, agreed.
Yeah, so we might come back to that piece in a minute actually about you being a seven and the whole pain piece, and obviously with your
Yeah.
training as a therapist and what that journey's been like for you. But just
Mm,
before we go there, like, so you mentioned your experience with the Enneagram, how it's helped you personally, deeply personally, and
mm,
professionally.
yeah.
Um, in what specific ways has it been like the most helpful for you?
Hmm. Well, I think I would say one of the most important pieces in our personal work, our professional work, our relational work is self awareness. Absolutely, it's self awareness. And so I don't know if there's a better tool for that than the Enneagram, and the extra depth of the subtypes, instinctual sequences, working with that has just increased my belief, I guess, that it is one of the best tools for self awareness. Because without self awareness, we can't do relationship well. We can't do our careers well. We can't do our inner growth well. Um, and so many times I work with individuals, couples, families. So many times when I'm doing relational work, say with couples or families, they come in thinking that the problems are always with their partner or with
Mm,
their child. But
yeah,
there's always a self piece that plays in any kind of relational system. And so if we're not aware of that, if we can't hold that, if we can't acknowledge that, that's going to be a problem. The work isn't going to go where it needs to go. And so when I think of the Enneagram, besides self awareness, I feel like it also brings us humility, like the ability to not think of ourselves as more than we are or less than we are, but just
mm,
as we are and able to hold that and admit when we're wrong or admit when our personal way of being in the world maybe isn't helpful, but then
yeah,
also to be able to show up well. in different scenarios. So I think the self awareness piece is probably what I would say has been the most impactful for me in my relationships and in my work.
Yeah.
That
Yeah,
answer your
thank you,
question.
Rachel. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I totally agree with you. I've recently found myself saying, if the Enneagram, well, I say the Enneagram, if the Enneagram of personality and the subtypes isn't true, how come it is?
Mm.
Did you know?
Right.
Because it is like, and that self-awareness piece is so important.
Mhm.
It's so important, isn't it? You know,
Yeah.
in terms of our relationships, personal and professional, and that
Mm.
self-awareness piece, that's a journey in and of itself, isn't it? I mean, a
Oh,
whole that's a
totally.
whole massive journey.
Yes, right? It is.
Yeah,
It continues. I mean, I think it's gonna
yeah,
continue, on this side of existence
yeah.
because I think we keep learning and we keep growing our whole lives. And so
Wow. Yeah,
neuroplasticity
yeah,
says that our brains can keep growing, which is very helpful to me because that means that nothing is ever finished. We can go back, we can repair, we can grow, we can show up even better. And I guess that's kind of an Enneagram 7 positive way of looking at it. But, neuroscience actually confirms this. And so that's been really cool to see in my work as well as in my life and in my journey. So,
yeah. That's beautiful. If something is true, it's true.
hmm
That's it. Regardless
yeah,
of whether we realize it's true or whether we've got the right name for it, or if it's
right.
true, it's true.
Absolutely. I fully agree with you.
um, so what was I going to say a minute ago? It was around the self-awareness piece,
Sure.
and again, this is something that I've recently kind of caught myself saying. uh,
Hmm.
the self-awareness of our patterns in personality, the self-awareness of who we are not, the self-awareness of our motivations, and that's a whole journey. But
Right.
also the self-awareness of who we're becoming and who we really are. Now,
Right.
depending on people's worldview and their faith and everything like that, how we
Mhm.
understand the true self and the false self, we're probably going to give it different language and different have a different understanding. But essentially,
Mhm.
it's saying something similar, even if it's not exactly the same. You know?
Right. Right. And I see that a lot because I work with people of all different, colors in their spirituality, faith
Yeah,
journeys, lack of faith journeys. And I see the thread. I see the similar thread through all of it. So, yes, I can totally get on board with that.
yeah. Interesting. And then so that's what makes the Enneagram like for want of a better word, or what a tool
Yeah.
that
Right.
it can be used by anyone.
Mhm.
Anyone can work with it or resonate with it because it's not
Yeah.
necessarily affiliated to one worldview.
No. No, it kind
Yeah,
of it moves between them pretty easily, which also
yeah,
I think is one of the benefits of it, right? Because I can use it with anyone in different arenas, in different ways, even. So some of my
yeah,
clients maybe don't even know that I'm using it,
yeah,
but it's helping
yeah,
me help them better. And some of them do know because they're into it or they saw it on my
yeah,
website or whatever. And they're like, ooh, let's talk about the Enneagram. But
yeah,
it's even helpful for me as a practitioner or as just a person in the world to know it in relationship with other people. And other people might not even come up as a thing, as a word, as a topic, but it's
mm,
still informing me and I'm still using it to help me build empathy and compassion for other people, as well as maybe understand things that are kind of hard for me with other people or
sure,
hard
yeah.
between other people. So it's just been I think a tool that expands my ability to show up in the world in a way that I like.
Okay, brilliant. So, and this is something that you said earlier that gave me this question,
Mhm.
and it's something similar's come around again.
Mhm.
Before you knew the Enneagram,
Mhm.
were there certain types, or are there still certain types of stereotypes, subtypes that
Sure.
tend to be triggering for you? And now
Mhm.
you know your subtype, and now you know the Enneagram. You're like, the reason why X subtype is triggering for me is because of X, Y, Z. Like, have
Yeah.
you gained that awareness?
Yes. Do I always like access that first in a scenario? No.
Or no? Sure.
It often requires some reflection before,
Yeah.
that comes to top of mind. Um, but I think about I think that before the Enneagram, I struggled maybe with people who struggle to make decisions and move on things in some ways.
Okay.
Um, I mean, before then, I didn't know I was a seven, and I like to go, and I like adventure, and I mean, I'm like action, action, let's move, right? Um, and I found even in my work as a therapist, which is a second career for me. So actually, I went to therapy school after I found the Enneagram, but with this kind of deeper spin on it now, I realize in my work sometimes that I push for action and movement, which is really great for some types, but for other types it's not. They have to come
Mm,
to their own decisions about things. They need to spin on some things for a while. And I think I can
yeah.
see that thread similar before and after. But now I understand it. I understand why I push for action, which is really a personal, you know, personality trait. Um, and others don't. So maybe some types like nines sometimes aren't as like action oriented. Sometimes Enneagram sixes have a
Mm,
really hard time deciding, right? Because there's so
yeah.
much information, and what if there's something they're missing? And
Yeah.
so I find that I need to make sure I'm very careful to not push on other people, because I
Mm,
would make a decision or I would move or things like that. And especially in the therapy world, right? There's a whole ethical thing about our clients having autonomy, and they're choosing. I'm here to observe and help, but mostly
mm,
it's up to them. And so that's a piece
yeah.
that I can see, and I can see a number of things like in my children, my parenting like relationship, how I would be annoyed by certain things, and now I understand why my children did the things sometimes that they did. Well, it makes so much sense now that they're adults, we know their type. Makes sense why I would annoy some of them.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as a
So
way, as a framework, because then it makes the interactions, although they are personal to a point, that it
mhm.
makes it something we can discuss that's happening outside of us, outside of
Right,
ourselves.
right.
And when we have, like you said, those understanding of certain behaviors may be triggering for us for different reasons, and we
Mhm.
can not necessarily in the moment, because that takes a great deal of reflection and awareness and maybe centeredness and all kinds of different things, but we can go back and go, I see what was happening there. And the more we go, I see what was happening there, we can sort of almost see it coming or be aware of it as it's happening.
Right, we
But
start to catch
it's,
it.
yeah,
We catch it
absolutely.
earlier. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we can choose. I'm like, because basically, I want to say that we're in a pattern the whole time.
Yes.
We're in a pattern. And if we can go, I'm in the pattern, I'm in the pattern, and they're in
Mhm.
their patterns, and
Yes.
our patterns are triggering for one another for different reasons. And it's like, so when we can kind of go, oh yeah, like it makes it less personal, doesn't it? Even though
Sure it does.
it can
And
be
you just
challenging.
described couples therapy and family systems therapy right there.
Oh
That's
wow.
exactly what we're getting at, right? We're all in patterns, and the
Yeah.
patterns play on each other, and they trigger each other, and that's all of family systems work right there. So
Wow.
the Enneagram gives
Yeah.
us a very detailed, pattern analysis, let's say.
Yes. Yeah.
There's some
Yeah.
other things that play into that, like the ability to regulate your nervous system, and how do we stay in a cognitive headspace when our nervous systems are triggered and we're feeling really, really squeezed in our window of tolerance. So there's some of those pieces, but yeah, the patterns are the problem usually. And if you can step outside the patterns and look at them from this more objective space, oftentimes you can find how could we shift the steps of the dance so that
Mm,
maybe we're not triggering each other, or we're
yeah.
communicating that we understand the trigger for each other. And that's a lot of what I do every day in my office. So
Yeah.
good job catching on to the patterns, man.
Yeah. No, but fascinating work. I think it's beautiful work that you do.
Mhm.
Really, really important work.
Thank
Um,
you.
yeah, really, really important.
Mhm.
So I know that you're also a Christian or identify as a Christian. Can you share with
Mhm.
me or with us what that experience has been like with the
Sure.
Enneagram and your Christian faith?
Yeah. Can I give you a couple caveats?
Absolutely.
Okay. One is that I work with a lot of people with spiritual trauma,
Right.
and have experienced some myself. And so I just think it's important to note that for a religion that has two of its basic tenets is love God and love others,
Yeah.
in some ways there's been a lot of damage done. And I just think it's important to say that I recognize that I work with people a lot who have a lot of deep hurt from the church. So that, and the other caveat is that it's really tricky in the US now. I don't know how it is in the UK, with a lot of Christianity being aligned with some sort of nefarious characters.
Right.
And so I don't know where people will be watching our interview from, but it's
Mm.
tricky to align with the Christian faith when you are a person who deeply loves and empathizes with people for a living and does work with people of all different faiths and spiritualities or lack thereof. So I just wanted to say that up front,
Thank
that
you,
I
Rachel.
acknowledge that. And
Thank you.
yes, most of my spiritual journey has been in the Christian realm. I've kind of been everything. I grew up Catholic. In high school, I was part of the Episcopalian
Okay.
church for a bit, which is basically American Anglican, American Anglican. um, Also, in high school, I was in a Lutheran youth group. I've been part of like liberal Lutheran, conservative Lutheran. I've been in the Pentecostal realm a bit. I've Baptist. I've just been all over. So I have a lot of ecumenicalism in my thinking around this. And I discovered the Enneagram through a Christian psychologist, Dr. David Benner.
Mhm.
He wrote a lovely book called The Gift of Being Yourself, and he
Yes.
talked about his experience with the Enneagram in it. And that was the first time I had even heard of this strange word, Enneagram. What is that? Ooh, that's a personality thing I haven't heard of. Ooh. So because that I heard about it from that book, I never really thought that it would be in conflict. And as I've discovered, it's not in conflict with any kind of spirituality or deeper inner journey like that. So I didn't have any qualms about it. And I found that, again, it goes back maybe to the humility piece. And I think it was St. Augustine who said, like, humility is like the basis for all the other virtues. And I think
Mm.
it's just that the Enneagram shows us, gives us self-awareness about where we are maybe strong, but also where we are weak. And it just brings a very clear picture into the work we need to do, as well as to watch, because sometimes the gifts maybe of our type become our faults if they take over, if they're driving. And I
Mm.
think there are many ways my 7 drives me, still does sometimes. And so it's just, yeah, I think it dovetailed beautifully to the place I was in because I was reading things like Benner, and
Mm.
trying to expand my vision of what self-awareness and faith look like. But I will say, Eric and I have taught on this a number of times, both before we had as much knowledge as we do now, and now we teach. And I think we've gotten the most pushback from
Oh,
Christians
wow.
who who push back saying, what is with all this focus on self? Why so much
Okay.
self? Why self-awareness? Shouldn't we be focused on God? Shouldn't we be focused on Jesus? And it's it's confusing to me because I'm like, if we don't know ourselves, how do we know God? If we don't know where we're struggling, how do we know where to work? If we don't know kind of how our gifts can work in the world, how do we use them? And so I think that it's always come back to for me that being most aware of yourself is actually the path to deeper spiritual growth.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that's how it's worked for me, is it's brought me just into a deeper appreciation for the grace with which God meets me, for the learning he brings into my life, for the people I get to meet like you.
Yeah.
Through this work, I have deep relationships with people that I love dearly, because we can talk about things in a vulnerable, safe space with this language of the Enneagram, with the
Yeah.
work we're all doing, with how it's so hard sometimes, but it's also so worth it. And so I think that's kind of how it's played together.
Yeah.
Did
Wow.
that answer your question, or is that too much? Or
No,
not?
that's a beautiful answer. I mean, there's so much you shared there. Um, I'm sorry, but
Um,
I just
Oh,
had
I
to get.
love that.
Um,
I love the emotion. I love it. I love it. Let it come. I love it.
I just.
For a 7, this
Um,
is good that I love your
yeah.
emotion. Yeah.
I think. I think what struck me, one of the things that struck me in what you shared was, like in the name of Christianity, like it's about loving God and loving people, and how
Mhm.
that can just go so horribly wrong. And I think I think the reason I'm getting upset is because I resonate with wanting to follow Jesus and looking up to him and going right like that. Um, I might be able to pick faults with Christianity, but I can't pick faults with Jesus. But
Mhm.
I can pick faults with myself as well as a Christian, as
Mhm.
someone that says love God, love people, and I'm thinking, well, okay then, Matt, how you getting on with that?
Yeah.
And I think and what you shared about the self-awareness piece, and when you've had some pushback from Christians saying, "What's all this talk about self?" And I just wanted to say, well, who do you think God is in relationship with?
Yeah,
Like
right?
who is God in a friendship with? Like where do you think God lives?
Mhm. Right. I mean, we're made in
Uh,
his image. Doesn't that
yeah,
mean that our self gives us some knowledge of what
yeah,
he might, what he might enjoy or love, or I mean,
yeah,
it's
absolutely,
so much bigger than us, but it is. I mean, that's how we process any kind of spirituality, right? It's through ourself.
yeah.
And
And
so,
just think of that like of a parent and a child, just like I want to hold you, I want to love you, and they're like, no, and they're like not wanting to focus on themselves, but the parent is wanting to love their child. That self awareness piece is it. I think maybe it's because it's got the word self in it. It might seem like self is an evil word. It's like,
yeah,
and
I think
I
we've been
get that.
trained that way. I think that's
Yes, yeah,
culturally trained that way, in especially
yeah,
in maybe spiritual systems that are more dualistic, more like black and white, this or that. You can't, it's like there's this opposite nature of things. Whereas I
yeah,
think the longer I've walked with God and in my spiritual journey, I've realized it's just far, far more gray than
yeah,
I was ever taught in many of the more dualistic systems, let's say.
yeah,
And there's a lot more in between, a lot more grace, I think, than we even know. I mean, like, the grace is boundless. And that's not to say I don't want to keep growing and loving
mm,
people better and loving God better, but also, I don't think we learn well in a punitive, shameful environment.
no, I agree,
And I mean, that's
I
what I
agree,
see a lot coming into my office, and that's where a lot of hurt comes from. This dualism of good, good versus bad, and this is good and this is bad. And I just
yeah,
think, maybe it goes back to what you said. Truth is truth, and we
yeah,
might have different words for it, but try it. If it works, right? It's
yeah, yeah,
so yeah. I guess I may be a little loosey goosey for some of some of the people maybe I was in in historic relationships with, but I just think
okay,
that love is bigger. Love is bigger than
yeah,
all of it, and it's sometimes hard. to believe, especially in the world as it is right now. It's so difficult, especially for people who have deep feeling or empathetic. It's really rough right now, I think. And I'm feeling it as deeply as my clients are feeling it, and we've come through COVID, and I mean, a lot of this is we're all just kind of trying to work it out together, right? We're just trying to walk each other home, and
Yeah.
it has meant a lot to me that I have friends in the world, even if they're not right next door, like you, that are
Yeah.
out there doing the same kind of work, that are, we're holding each other up in a way, even though we're far apart. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's beautiful. And with the shame piece,
Mhm.
I think shame and guilt, I think it keeps people trapped. It keeps
Mhm.
people like and keeps people trapped. And Jesus came to set us free. So I don't think he wants us in guilt and shame.
Sure.
But religion, or a way that it can be communicated, or um it it can have that effect.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's I think
And let's just say
yeah,
it's not only Christianity that does this. I mean, any kind of like
yeah,
human system for belief in anything maybe can get there. I haven't explored all of them, but I can imagine that many of them can get to that dualistic, legalistic kind of place. And I just don't think
mm,
that's where we're going to find our freedom to love people well, to love God well, to journey deeper. It just, I mean, I think maybe we talked about this before, but like Brene Brown talks a lot about shame and how
mm,
much it does not help. But
yeah,
I see
no,
it I see it quite often, and so I think sometimes guilt can be redemptive if it moves us because we've actually hurt someone and we need to repair, and it moves us to repair. I think that can be redemptive, but just general shame and the general guilt, not so much. So I
mm,
am I am gonna go for love and grace all the way.
yeah. Uh, Interesting. Yeah, I love that. Love and grace. That
Love and
that
grace.
that resonates deeply within me.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rachel. Is there anything else you'd like to share about Christianity and your journey with it and the Enneagram?
um, I'm wondering what you think about this. The Enneagram, I think of when I think of it, I think about it as a self awareness tool. I think about it as an inner journey tool. I
Yeah.
also think about our Enneagram types as a way we've tried to protect ourselves in the world. And
Mm,
so our type is not the ideal of who we want to be. It's kind of our shield, maybe, our armor. And it's a way we've developed since we were really young, to stay safe. And it came on board because our personalities were kind of like that, or because of our experiences. I believe it's both, actually, that it's kind of
mm,
both,
me too.
nature and nurture.
Yeah,
Why do I become a seven? It's both, I think. But I
I
also
do.
think it's how we protected ourselves in the world. And in some of my former Christian systems, I have seen how, like, the type gets doubled down on when there's stress or when there's conflict. Um, and I guess now that I think about it, it's not just Christian systems; it's all systems, right? Because I think people feel like if they're stressed or if they're feeling threatened, they're going to come out stronger in those protective systems. And I do this too, right? My
Mm,
seven comes out strong if I'm feeling stressed or under attack, or maybe in a conflict with somebody. And so I think if you look at the Enneagram from that lens, from the types being protective, I think that it becomes easier to move to a more objective space about other people, which then helps you love them better. And so I
yes.
guess I'm not sure exactly if this is if this is super important to. Is there anything else that I think is important in Christianity? I think maybe it's important in everything, but when you see problems in faith systems, I think it comes back to this idea that self awareness is the path to solve the problem.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
empathy for someone else being really, really strong in their type is a way to navigate when someone is feeling difficult to you or has hurt you. Um, and the more we're aware of this in any kind of system, faith based systems included, the more we're going to be able to work together well, the more we're going to be able to love God and love others well as a collective. And so
Yeah.
I think realizing that our Enneagram types have really been useful to be protective, but we don't want to live there. We don't want them to drive. Is probably the biggest self awareness piece I think any of us need in a faith system or outside of it.
Mm, yeah. I agree. I think that really resonates with like how I see it as well.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. I think that's it. I maybe covered everything.
Thank you, Rachel. So, you shared earlier about getting in touch with the Enneagram around 2008. So,
Yes.
what was the whole journey like of discovering you were a seven? Like, what was that
Oh,
whole journey like?
okay. Um, so when I took the test on the Enneagram Institute's website, and it told me that I was either a 7 or a 2. Now, I had no
Interesting.
idea what any of this meant when I took it,
Yeah.
right? And so what I did is I printed out, this is, back in the day before we were all digital, right? And had digital tools. I printed out both of the reports and I started with a highlighter. I started highlighting anything I felt that felt true to me. And not only was the 7 report more highlighted, but there was one line in the Enneagram 2 report that made me know I was not a 2. And
Okay.
it said this: the Enneagram 2 will be the most nurturing parent ever. And I
Mm.
knew that is not me. My husband is the most nurturing parent ever. But not so nurturing. Now, I am fun. I'm a very fun parent. I knew that. I find lots of fun things for us to do. But the nurture piece, maybe not quite my strong suit. And so that
Mm.
convinced me, besides the fact that the 7 was very highlighted, that I was a 7. I also resonated with just about everything in the 7 category, except that piece about how 7s try to avoid pain. I thought,
Okay.
I don't do that. I've walked through lots of pain. My parents divorced. I've worked with people in pain a lot. I don't avoid pain. So I had this, I don't quite get that part, but everything else fit me to a T. So
Mm.
I went with that because that's what I thought I was. And it took me some time to figure out what avoiding pain meant, and it didn't necessarily mean that I couldn't see people cry, although that was far more uncomfortable for me than maybe some other people. Which is funny that I became a therapist in the end, isn't it? um, but I realized I try to avoid pain by avoiding conflict. I try to
Mm.
avoid pain by like telling everyone why really it's okay. We don't need to be upset about this because it's really okay because of this and this and this and this. I am a great reframer, which I didn't have that term
Yeah.
back then. But that's how I avoided pain. And I didn't realize that probably till like 2014. Although I accepted that I must do that somehow. But I didn't realize how deeply that went until 2014. My husband and I were having some pretty intense issues in our relationship. And I started my own therapy. And
Mm.
all of a sudden I realized, oh, that's where it's coming out. It's coming out really intensely in this marriage conflict we're having. Um, and that's when I really started to know what that meant and how that felt in my body. And so that's when I understood that more completely. So I mean that's what 6 years later when that
Yeah.
became very, very real for me. And then I could start seeing in other places, but um, yeah. So I think it's kind of a funny story. Of course, the positive 7 thinks they
Yeah.
don't have the one thing that identifies the 7. Well, it's not the one thing. There's lots of things that identify as 7. I had all the others, but this one thing, this one negative pain point, oh, I don't do
Mm,
that. So I
yeah,
was a little asleep to myself even then, and I've become
yeah,
more and more awake, and I wouldn't trade that for the world. And like you said, it
yeah,
hasn't always been great. There's some pretty painful moments in that journey in our marriage. Um, and I wouldn't change it. But I also won't sugarcoat it and say that it was great all the time. 'Cause it really wasn't. Really,
yeah,
really, really was horrid a lot of the time.
yeah,
So sometimes, like you said, the work isn't fun. Sometimes it's deeply painful to realize you're part of it and the part you play in it. It's hard work, and I don't want to go back.
yeah,
I don't want to go back. So
yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And so, what I'm hearing you say is, you took a test, the
yeah,
RETI, was it the RETI one?
it was the ready.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and 7 was basically your top score with 2. Interesting that the 2 was there because obviously, as you'll know, the 2 is this lookalike for the social 7, so that's an interesting
sure
thing.
is. Hmm.
um, and then so I'm hearing you say that you kind of resonated with 7 more or less from the word go. So you didn't
Yeah,
think that you were other numbers along the journey. It was
I
I'm
did.
pretty sure I'm a 7.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yep.
but and also what you shared, it spoke to what we were saying earlier about
Mhm.
the self-awareness piece literally being a journey. I mean, a
Yes.
6-year journey for you going, oh yeah, the pain thing.
Hmm.
And it's as you're saying about peeling off the onion layers.
Yes.
It is a journey, isn't it? Of
Yeah.
years.
Yeah, years. I'd even
Yeah,
say that and maybe you've had this experience too, because we kind of started our journey with this deeper part of it, the subtypes, the instinctual sequence, around maybe the same-ish time.
yeah,
Um, that I had no idea how many layers there were to go. And kind of fast tracked
yeah,
some of my layers in just the last year and a half. And again, I'm so grateful. It has not been a picnic, but I'm grateful and I don't want to go back. I mean, I
mm,
just I don't want to go back to being more asleep. I think
sure,
I feel so much more connected to myself, to the people I work with, to my family. I mean, than I ever had have. So I don't want to go back to that like a sleep place, even though it's been a little bit rough on the ego
yeah,
to go through some of the hard stuff.
yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful because you said earlier about our egos and our personality being a bit like a shield or like a safe, a thing that we do to kind of protect us.
Yeah,
So, and it kind of works.
it does.
It does work,
It does work until it doesn't.
and it doesn't work.
Yes, it works until it doesn't work. Is when I
I
say
love that saying.
often.
Yeah,
I
it
think it
works until it
stops
doesn't.
working is when I get people in my office. Usually,
Okay.
there's some significant way it has stopped working. Their shield, their personality stopped working, and they end up in my office then
Yeah.
because there's something that they can't quite figure out, and that's why I ended up in my therapist's office. Right? There's something I could not quite
Yeah.
figure out about this conflict, and why could we not resolve this thing?
Yeah.
Um, and then part of it was me. Oh, imagine that. I'm part of the pattern,
Yeah.
and my shield is part of the problem. Oh, imagine that.
Yeah.
And so it began a significant part of my journey. And I see that happen a lot now because it also changed. I knew I was headed for a shift. Eventually, my children they were growing up. They're getting into their late teens, becoming adults. So, but it changed the trajectory of what I thought I would be doing when I grew up after my kids left. So,
Yeah. Wow.
mhm,
No, it's brilliant work, and with the our ego and our personality being like a shield coming out of it. You've used the word awake a few times,
yeah,
like awaking up out of the sleep, out of the patterns, but
yes,
it's almost coming out of the protection of the shield as well. So it
right,
can be more kind of more vulnerable, but at the
right,
same time more alive.
right. I would
Yeah,
totally agree with that description. More vulnerable, but more alive.
yeah, and not
And
wanting to go
we
back.
want to be careful, like who we are more vulnerable with. I mean, not everyone is safe, emotionally safe for us.
Yeah,
But but when you have some people where you can be emotionally safe, it's
Yeah,
powerful. It's powerful work. It's powerful journey. And
yeah,
it's nice to not have the protection or the shield driving anymore. It's nice to, and I think
yeah.
awake, asleep, true self, false self, there's a lot of different terms in psychology, in faith, in spirituality to use for this concept. But I
Mm,
think it's all the same.
yeah. I think it's, different groups of people might put different language or different understanding on it and not quite feel comfortable with it for various reasons. But
Oh, for
uh,
sure. Yeah.
yeah, like the lower resolution, like the bigger picture, is it's kind of saying something similar, even if it isn't the exact same thing. But
Right.
maybe from another perspective, it is saying the exact same thing, and it's just
Sure.
different language.
Hmm. Right.
um,
Right.
Understanding, like that's part of my type, is just I just want to understand, and that's been one of the traps for me in my personality style, is wanting to understand myself and other people so I can make the relationships better. I have all
Hmm.
of this fantastic knowledge,
Yes.
but the next challenge for me is, okay, now do something with it, like
Sure.
whether it's personally or professionally. Okay, now go and do something with it, and
Right.
that's quite a challenge.
Is, and I'm a head type like you,
Yeah.
right? And I used to say, I still say it sometimes, that I've lived my whole life above my chin
Yeah,
because our mental center is so strong, and each of the types have the strongest like wisdom center, right? I've
yeah.
lived in my head my whole life, and so now I think my goal is to actually balance my wisdom centers, not just use my head, but also dig into my heart, dig into my body. What's my body saying? What's my intuition say? So really, I
Yeah.
think my journey in the last year and a half has been about, like, first of all, finding those wisdom centers, like maybe dabbling
Yeah.
with them a little bit. They seem so scary compared to like logicking it all in my head. And my head is so much faster. I mean, something comes up, my head will, and I'm sure that's your
Yeah.
experience too as a six, right?
Yeah.
Our heads are so fast. So pausing, taking a breath, getting deeper, thinking what's happening below my chin,
Yeah.
slowing
Yes.
down, so important to trying to balance those wisdom centers in different ways on purpose, trying to get out of my head. What things bring me out of my head, but help me get in touch with my heart and my gut. It's a
Love
lot
it.
of my work, I think, in the next years ahead of me,
Mm.
is to grow deeper into balancing those centers. So balancing my head, heart, and gut. I also think of spirituality as kind of as a wisdom center, whatever
Yeah.
that looks
Okay.
like for different people. So maybe there's a kind of fourth center there.
Yeah.
Um,
I
I
love
learned
that.
that from Eric's coach, actually, my husband's coach, and I thought, oh, that's so true, right? It kind of gave wholeness to my thinking that I didn't have before. But
Yeah.
I think, yes, balancing and growing, and some of those spots that for my type are weaker, is my next kind of growth curve. It's what I've been working on lately. And
Mm.
it's helpful when you have friends or coaches who are different centers than you, right? Because they can
Yeah.
pull on that. They can pull that out of you in a way. They can model for you what that looks like. And so I happen to be working with two different people right now who are both body types, and it's been so good for me because
Mm.
they're like, you're up here. You're up here.
Yeah.
Let's
Yeah.
get below your chin, right? Get below your chin. And it's so helpful.
Yeah. People that don't necessarily know the Enneagram,
Hmm.
and I find it. uh, How do I find it? Um, Reassuring that I am my type, because I've been questioning my type for years. But I think
Okay.
that's part of the six stuff, like questioning it.
Sure.
But when I get feedback from people that don't necessarily know the Enneagram, and they just say to me, therapists, um, people that I suspect are
Hmm.
body types, and
Yes.
someone that I know definitely is a body type, their complaints with me is more of a complaint.
Yes.
You're in your head like too
Yes.
much, and
Yep.
I think for a body type, depending on what the subtype is and everything, it probably is annoying to the body type because they are not it's the feedback I used to get from my wife is, where are you? where
Hmm.
where are you? You're not
Yeah.
present. And I'm
Yeah.
like, I am here, but not in the same way she is as a
Right.
body type.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
And here's something that really helped Eric and I, because Eric's a heart type. So my husband's a heart type. And we realized this when we were doing that really difficult work there for a while. Um, our metaphor for the wisdom centers is like a train. And
Mm,
whichever center is your center, it's very, very fast. So it's like a speed
yeah.
train. So think, like Paris, the TGV. And so a conflict shows up, and my head goes zoom down the track
Yeah.
at a million miles an hour.
Mm,
And his heart goes vroom down the track a million miles an hour. And then we find ourselves 2 million miles apart in totally different spaces because I'm trying to figure it out in my head and he's trying to figure it out with his heart. And so we've used that metaphor when we're in conflict to say, hopefully, one of us is a little more calm than the other, to say,
yeah.
I don't know where you are, but I think we're missing each other. I think he said it to me more often, let's be real. I think you're a bunch of stations down the track and I don't know how you got there. So can you come back to our station and sit here with me for a minute and kind of help me understand where you just went? And I can say the same thing to him. Whoa, that was a big emotional reaction and I'm not quite sure what happened there. Can we
Mm,
try to reconvene at the same station and come back? Because those intelligence centers are protective and so fast that we can be in totally different worlds on this. That's just what you said about you and your wife
yeah.
when she says, "Where are you?" Because the head types are in their head somewhere, and it
Yeah.
doesn't feel present to a body type. It
No.
doesn't feel present to a heart type either. Yes, so I get that same complaint, like, "Where you're not with me." It's like, oh
Yeah.
yes, I was, down here 7 ideas later already. Let me come back
Yeah.
and let me ground into myself, my body. Usually for me, that's a deep breath, like, okay, stay here, Rach, stay here. Don't, it's a mindfulness
Body.
practice, really,
Yeah.
about staying instead of racing.
Yeah.
I also know
Profound.
when I'm racing, that's when I know that I am off kilter somehow. When my head's racing and I'm feeling scattered and maybe a little shaky, flighty, I'm like, okay, personality's probably driving. That's a seven's perspective on when I feel like my
Yeah.
personality's driving. I'm a little all over the place and I'm trying to solve all the problems and I trying to create something, push something into being. I can, when I
Mm,
feel that my nervous system reacting like that, I'm like, oh, okay, how do I regroup? How do I recenter? And almost always it's that slow down, breathe, get into my body, sit solid, stay. What's here? What's right now? What's present? Go with that.
yeah. Yeah. It's really profound work because I had an experience in therapy the other day where I was all in my head. Um, and she doesn't necessarily know the Enneagram, or she doesn't know the Enneagram, but she's talking, and I'm able to filter it through my understanding of the Enneagram, and I'm able to
Mhm.
go, oh yeah, of course, yeah, of course, I'm in my head, like,
Mhm.
and she did a body exercise for me, and I was the my emotional reality of a situation completely changed when I went into my body,
Mhm.
and I thought,
Isn't
wow,
that
that's
a big thing?
profound. Yeah,
So profound. So profound. Which is why
yeah,
I think balancing the centers
yeah,
is our next arc of work as far as growing more into that space where our personality or our shields aren't in front anymore. I mean, we're not going to
yeah,
lose them, right? They're
yeah,
part of us. They're in our world. Sometimes they're gifts. Sometimes they're really helpful in our work or in our daily life. But we don't want them to drive. We want this
mm,
more oh, what's a good word? This more this self that can encompass more than that, that can be more than that. The true self, maybe. The
yeah,
truest part of us to be driving, and that's going to mean we're more balanced. We're more in the center of the Enneagram. We have qualities of more of the types. We have all of our wisdom centers online. We are
mm,
able to stay open, knowing
yeah,
we don't need that protection because we're whole and true in our worlds. I think there's something about that arc of growth of trying to balance and trying to not always use my go-to that's been really hard and also
Yeah,
really good. I mean, any kind of like body modality for me, for head types, I think is good.
yeah.
So,
No, I completely agree with you. And funnily enough, I was only having a similar experience yesterday.
hmm
Um, and I know for some people, possibly Christians, the word meditation might seem a bit, a bit whatever.
yeah,
But for what's another word for meditation? Contemplation, or anyway,
yes,
I was sitting still, and I was
mhm,
contemplating, and the scripture came to my mind: "Be still and know that
yeah,
I am God." And so,
right,
what is that like? To be
mhm,
still and know that I am God, like in my head, in my heart, in my body,
mhm,
and to be connected to God, to ourselves, or to other people, to be connected, to be present,
right,
to be alive, awake in the moment. I think it's easier not to do it.
yeah,
It's easier not to do it, and I think that's why I hear the word being more conscious.
hmm
You know, I hear that word quite a lot about becoming more conscious, because it is in that kind of waking up, being
yeah,
more present, making conscious choices rather than just almost being asleep to the patterns that we're in, and
yeah.
not
Work.
truly living, not really.
Yeah, that's the work.
Yeah, but
That's
it's so
cool.
easy.
I'm
but it's
thankful for
easier
your
said than done, though.
vulnerability. Thank you for sharing those stories about your therapy and and about your wife. I mean, it's so true, right? There's so many ways that this plays in our lives,
Yeah,
between our in our loved ones and our families, our friends. I know you and I are both in professional work where we use this. I mean,
yeah,
there's so many ways it plays. So the more and more we keep, I think, digging and growing and waiting for, and it's not always even that I have to figure out what to do. I
mm,
mean, there's a true self universal wisdom, I think, and
yeah,
we would call it God, that sometimes gives us the nuggets,
yes,
or
yeah,
gives
yeah,
us stepping stones. We don't always see them at first, right? They show up sometimes. It's not all dependent on us. I think that's part of the grace too.
yeah. I love
But
that.
we need to be open. We want to be still and know.
Yeah,
Um, and meditation contemplation actually is a big part of faith in the church. If you go back to like the mystics or the guys in the caves. Why can't I think of who they're called
desert
now?
mothers and fathers.
Yeah, yeah, the
Yeah,
desert mothers and fathers, right?
yeah,
I mean, that there's a long history of contemplation,
yeah. There is.
meditation. I mean, even getting, some of the traditions get the words of Jesus and they just meditate on them. And so
Mm,
there's also a living thing about faith, right? It's not just past, it's present. And if we
yeah,
believe in an omniscient God or a leading or a shepherding, all of that, it has to be in the present because that's where we live.
yeah.
And so I think that getting silent, that getting grounded in our bodies allows us to be open. I call it like throwing pebbles in the pond. And then I see which
Mm,
ripples come back to me. And then I kind of wander down that path a little bit. And sometimes the door of the path says, oh, nope, closed, or a tree falls in front and says, nope, not the path. Okay. So
yeah.
maybe there's a different path. And sometimes the grace is in that the path shows up. Sometimes the grace is in that I wander a path and the path gets closed. Sometimes the grace is in just being where I am right now, which is really hard for a seven. We're always in the future, we're always planning the
Mm,
next adventure. But learning to just see what's happening and join it is
mm.
it's a new discipline for a future oriented seven. So very cool
Yeah,
stuff.
yeah, absolutely. And it's
You
great
can't
that the
find that
Enneagram.
stuff without the seek in the here in the stillness, I think.
Yeah, that's beautiful, and it's interesting how the Enneagram has helped you and helped us to understand, to put language to
Ah,
all of this.
Yes, maybe
Yeah.
that's the besides it being the best self-awareness tool, maybe that's the other thing that I find it so helpful with, is it gives
Mm.
us common language. It gives people language to describe where they're struggling, language to describe where they're not struggling.
Yeah.
This awake asleep language is super important in my work. So the common language that helps people understand themselves better and helps me understand myself better, helps us understand each other better.
Yeah.
Good call out.
Beautiful. So, how have you found how have you found learning more about being a social seven? How have you found that helpful?
That's been so helpful because social sevens are the counter type. So
Mm.
we look a little different than some of the other sevens. And that was helpful for me because I have a very, very dear friend who's a seven, but I would be like, wow, I mean, we're very alike in some ways, but we're very, very different in other ways. And it helped me understand a lot about how I try to care about everybody else,
Mm.
and how that works with my type to create a lot of things. Oh, it creates some negative things in that I am driven to make sure everybody else is okay. I also tend to think that I can save everybody, and both of those
Mm.
things are not helpful for your own spiritual growth because you don't pay attention very much to yourself. Now, sevens usually are kind of considered a little bit selfish. They're always about, what they want to do in their adventures, and that was the part of the seven um that I would rub up against with other sevens because I was always trying to make sure everybody else was okay, and it rubbed wrong in my marriage because I would always have to make sure, and I actually still struggle with this, that my husband's okay. And then sometimes what that meant was that I would like invalidate his feelings because I was trying to make him okay.
Mm.
And making someone okay is not always validating because say, oh, well, you should feel sad about that because of this and this and this and this. And you shouldn't feel negative about that because of this and this and this and this. And you can see how the social making him okay and this like positivity, relentless positivity of the seven would create the system where he didn't get to have his feelings. And when he did have
Mm.
to have his get it when he did have his feelings, I would get scared because he wasn't okay. And then I would jump into action. And
Mm.
teasing that apart has been so important for our relationship. It also, that social part of me keeping everyone else okay, created this dynamic inside of myself where I was both God, trying to save everybody,
Yeah.
at the same time as I was staying small and not owning some of the things I was being called to out of fear of other people not being okay if I did those things. So this is a battle that other sevens I think don't have. They kind of like get the idea, do the thing.
Yeah.
Sometimes they don't consider others enough, which is where we get that kind of like selfish, self-referential piece of the stereotype of seven. But I was kind of stuck because I could feel a calling to something bigger, but be afraid to do it because I was based on what other people would think and would it keep everybody okay. At the same time as some of the calling felt like I needed to save the world, which I can't do. I'm not. I'm
Yeah.
very definitely not God, which I learned very, very clearly at Retreat A. In a way that was,
Mm.
I think, in your a little in your face for me as a social seven. I like to be really nice about things. But it was great.
Mm.
It was a changing point, right? To realize that some of my sacrificial giving was actually not so sacrificial. It was like it was keeping my ego going.
Mm.
And it was a little, and it was like playing God, and I need to let go of that because first of all, I'm not God, and secondly, I can't do that. That's a recipe for burnout, which I have experienced in different arenas, spiritually
Mm.
and in work. So the social seven paradigm that we get stuck in, this kind of push pull of keeping everybody okay, but also thinking we have to save everybody, becomes this kind of like tornado of energy suck that just keeps you not knowing exactly what you need to do or what you want to do, even because we feel like paying attention to ourselves is selfish.
Yeah.
So we don't consider ourselves. We have all this energy that we pour out, which is how we look like twos, right? We have all this energy that we pour out into other people, but we're always feeling a little like, am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? I mean, there's just this push pull all the time. And so
Mm.
learning that about myself, seeing how that has played in my relationships with my children, in my work, has been very hard and very helpful all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know
Thank you
that
for
that was very
sharing that.
concise. Sevens have a lot of words, I think.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that, Rachel.
Yeah,
It just sounds like again, it's just been another piece of self
another piece.
understanding that's
Yep,
been really helpful for you
deeper
in your
piece.
personal and professional lives.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. You're gonna have to edit this interview a lot.
it's all good.
Lots of words. Sevens have lots of words.
I love it. Is there any other ways that being a social seven has been helpful? Knowing that you're a social seven has been helpful for you.
No, I think that I mean, there's ways that the instinctual sequence has also been helpful.
Okay.
If you don't mind moving there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the seven is driving, usually it's the dominant instinct I have. Before I knew that, it was definitely like pushing, and it was the engine of my train, let's say. Um, but I realized there are ways that I wasn't taking care of myself. My middle instinct is that self-preservation instinct.
Mm,
So that was easier to deal with than that sexual instinct being repressed, because that's the body part of it, right? The instinct part of it. Um, Things like I would schedule myself as a therapist, like for 6, 7 clients in a row. Well,
mm,
when do you eat and when do you use the restroom? And I wasn't taking care of myself, right?
yeah.
In this bid to want to help everybody and squeeze everybody in, I wasn't taking care of myself. So by, client 6 and 7, I'm probably not the best therapist I could be at that point, right? So I noticed right away
Mm,
that's how it's playing. So building up that self-preservation, that ability to like, okay, what are important things to keep myself being a good therapist, a good partner. I'm an extrovert, but I need quiet time. I need quiet time every day if I can, because it helps
yeah.
me reground, right? So this considering of self, that considering yourself really isn't selfish, which is the social seven, piece. We're so afraid of being considered selfish. Bringing that online has made me such a better therapist, a better partner, because I am taking all but care of myself, not expecting
Mm,
anyone else to do that now, right? And so
mm,
that was helpful. And then that third piece, that repressed instinct, that's where my power lives. And I didn't know that. That's where my most grounded self is. And that was the piece of me that was being most neglected. Um, and so the second retreat is where I worked with that some. And so because I've looked at that sequence now, because it still plays, I mean, it's like, it's who I am in a way. But because I have so much more awareness, I'm able to embody myself in a different way. I'm
mm,
able to bring those again, it's balance, right? Balancing the wisdom centers. I think it's also balancing those instincts so that we can use them when they're needed, when they're important. When it's important for
mm,
us to have them show up, they're available because we know where they are in our system.
mm,
We know what we might not be paying attention to, so we can say, okay, what does it look like if I also pay attention to this part of me? What does it look like if I also pay attention to my heart, to my body, to that part of me that I don't let come online as much? What if that comes online too? Then I have a much bigger picture of what I might need to be doing or where I am in the world, how I need to work with this person, how I need to build my relationship with my middle child, how all these different things play in a much more balanced way if we're
mm,
aware of how our system, our pattern, so to speak, is, and we're actively
mm,
working to bring some of it back in balance. And so all those, that you get that subtype and then the instinctual sequence. And again, we're bringing it into balance. And when I think of, God, I think of a perfect balance.
mm,
I think that God doesn't struggle with imbalance, right?
yeah,
And
no,
this side of existence, I think humans will always struggle in some ways, but the inner growth journey is that path to trying to be more balanced in all the things, trying to see it from the center, trying to walk in the world in such a way that we can be love and hope and balance and help other people come into balance, help
yeah,
others find their true self. Is I think our true self is the balance. And
mm,
so we're not living in protection. We're also not living in imbalance the other way. We're just in that space that's our truest self, the way God intended. Like what
yeah.
he gave us in the beginning, the image of him, in all the different ways that we show that, in all the different facets that God has. I think that's all of us, right? We're showing different pieces of
Mm.
him. So
Again, that's really beautiful, and yeah, it's just lovely to hear how it's been really helpful for you again in your relationships, and
yeah.
how and just having that awareness piece of going, I can choose to do something different in this situation. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
to be in the patterns, and using the wisdom of that to
Mm-hmm.
make your life and the lives of those that you're working with and that you live with,
Mm-hmm.
relating with, better.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the goal,
Yeah,
isn't it? We're gonna love God and love others.
yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, that love God,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I've been spiritual since I was a little kid, and I think it's that social seven piece, right, of wanting to help other
Mm,
people, but it gets twisted into something that it shouldn't be. This sacrificing for others, the martyr complex, the God complex. I can save everybody, which wasn't how I was thinking of it, but it actually underneath was what I'm
mm,
always trying to care for everybody else and not paying attention to my own system.
yeah,
I was a teacher first, which is trying to help everybody else. Now I'm a
yeah.
therapist trying to help everybody else. I have to keep that in really, really in good perspective, though.
Mm,
Otherwise, I create systems that are unhealthy, and so that's another space that it's really helped me to like try to bring everything more into balance. Try to be very honest with what are the motives here. They're not always pure motives,
yeah.
and I still feel like I'm working in my calling. I still found this work is has been so incredible. I'm absolutely privileged and honored to be able to do it with people. So it's not bad that I chose this work. It is partially my personality that chose it, and I'm a much better person in this role now with the awareness I have now than I was or I would have been staying asleep to some of these things.
Mm. Absolutely. And how has that changed from like being with yourself with the pain, and then how that's helped you to be with others in their pain?
Yeah, I mean, you wouldn't think of a seven as the prototype for someone who can sit with some pretty deep pain.
Yeah.
But I think acknowledging the pain, my fear of pain, going into my own pain, um, doing my own work as well as the couple's work my husband and I have done. We have actually done some family work too. Um, all of that has made me be able to hold it in a much different way than I could have before. And of course, I have clients that come in with all sorts of things. And I have some clients with some really, really deep trauma. It's deep pain. So I have to be able to hold it. But I also know it's not my job to fix it.
Mm.
Their system, their spirituality, um, th- that's what's going to fix it. And I have a lot of theories I hold in my head that play really well with the Enneagram that help me
Yeah.
help people move in little steps along this journey. And I'm not going to be the, be all end all for many of my clients, but I feel like I can move them along a step. And in
Mm.
my own work, that's the same thing, right? I'm just trying to move along a step. And when I can stay there, it doesn't feel overwhelming. But if I look like at the long haul, I think, you know, it's really hard. But it's just the next
Yeah.
best thing, the next best step, right? And it's the same for my clients. But being able to look at pain and hold it as not something scary, super important. It's important for the freedom of my friends and family. It's important for the freedom of my clients. And I've been
Mm.
amazed at how much I can hold and not be afraid, which is, I think, huge amounts of growth for me. If I look back to like 2008 and learning I'm a 7 and how I operated then and how I operate now. And so
Yeah.
that's again why I wouldn't want to go back, because I wasn't holding it well then. I was trying to shove it down then, in myself, in my kids, in my partner, in everyone in my world probably.
Yeah.
And that's just not how we can walk through the world authentically. We have to be able to engage all of it, the good, the bad, the ugly, in order to move through the world as a real person. And so that's been the gift of this work, I think, is the authenticity, being able to move through the world in a less armored way, more vulnerable way. Again,
Mm.
carefully. I'm not going to put my soul out there for people I know aren't safe, but I am going to stay as authentic as I can, because I think that reflects the image of God in me to be
Yeah.
in that space. So,
Yeah, no, that's beautiful, Rachel. I think that that call to authenticity for all of us really
mm-hmm.
is a beautiful place to be in. And it's coming out of our well, the first step, I guess, like we said earlier, is the self-awareness piece, and it can take um it can take years
Yeah,
to fully grow in self-awareness,
and
and
that's
then
okay.
and that's
That's
one
okay
journey,
too.
and then
Yeah.
another journey is, okay, now I've identified the patterns.
Mm-hmm.
Now I've identified them. Now I've accepted them and the consequences of me having these patterns in my life,
Mm-hmm.
in my relationships.
Yeah.
Okay, and that's another journey. And then the another journey is to do something about it, to
Right.
create new patterns, and that's like another journey as well. And I love what
Yeah.
you said about just taking one step forward, because I've fallen into the trap a few times of going, oh my goodness, I'm looking through the rest of my life, and
Yeah.
all I see is just so much growth work, and
Yeah.
it all feels too much. But the um like Jesus says, to just focus on living today, because there's enough troubles in today. And tomorrow will take.
That is
And
so
just that
true.
I resonated with what you said, because it just,
Yeah.
that I can do that one step,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a beautiful thing, and I think that's a great encouragement for people listening,
Yeah.
that we can just take that one, that it might be a big step, but that one step forward is a significant step.
It is.
Yeah,
Just let it set for a while.
yeah,
Just let it.
and then that one step becomes a secure base. It becomes
Yeah.
the new comfort zone.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We just spread it out a little. Just kind of push on those walls a little at a time.
Yeah, it gets bigger and more flexible, but there's the wisdom in there, like you've
Mm-hmm.
shared as well, the wisdom of having more vulnerability, more authentic, being more authentic, but
Mm-hmm.
yet also having the wisdom of not just sharing with people that, like you've said, that aren't necessarily safe to share with.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Um, yeah. How have you
That's
noticed
so
being a
fun to
social
talk to.
seven? How have you noticed being a social seven helpful in as a Christian, or in your faith?
Hmm. Well, I think my socials. Okay, this might sound kind of rough, kind of mean. I think
Okay.
my social 7 was perfect for dualistic church,
Okay.
because a lot of church can be about learn more, which I'm good at, and do more, which I'm also good at. I have a big capacity, I have a big energy, I have a lot of ideas. So it that played very nicely for a long time, until it didn't. Like we've said, I mean, the personality works really, really well until it doesn't, until we hit the wall. till we start running into things that are hurtful, or that are burnout, that we just don't have anything left to give. So it also played nice with that message of we should sacrifice everything, including ourselves, for the work. And I just don't think that's balanced. It's not true. We're not God. We don't have unlimited resources. Um, yes, sometimes there is sacrifice, but it's not all sacrifice. And if we don't take care of the vessel, we're not going to be very useful. If we don't connect with the source, we are gonna run out. Our doing has to connect with our being. I don't know if you know Pete Scazzaro. He did some work around emotionally healthy spirituality that was pretty pivotal in my work early on. I think I already knew about the Enneagram at that point, but I did not know a lot about rest and Sabbath and being with God versus doing for God. And so that piece of it, of course, the messages I had before that played really nice with my social 7. My social 7 really, powered me through those. But my social 7 was tired. My social 7 was burned out. My social 7 was quite hurt by a number of things. And my social 7 didn't realize that it's also a God complex in a way, to think that I can sacrifice enough to save the world, right? In whatever ways, as a teacher, as a therapist, as a Christian. So learning about my social 7, noticing how that played so nicely in certain systems, and knowing how I don't want to play in those systems anymore in that way, has given me a sense of freedom. And I guess that's maybe where my push for grace comes from, my push for freedom, which also is a 7 thing. We love to be free. But there isn't a freedom for the social 7 that maybe there is for other 7s, but in balance, that freedom exists. In balance, I do take care of the vessel, and I am being just as much or more maybe than I'm doing. And I don't mean that in a time construct, but in a mindfulness construct. I'm staying connected throughout the day. I'm trying to keep my wisdom centers balanced. I'm trying to keep my instincts balanced. I'm trying to check in that the Holy Spirit energy, you might want to call it, I don't know. In that inner wisdom that I think is our image of God place. I'm trying to stay there in my life versus using my skills or my outward persona, my ego, to make all the things happen, to show up. I want to show up in a more authentic wholeheartedness than just this Enneagram social 7 kind of way that I've shown up a lot of my life. And so that's how that's kind of played. It means my faith journey has become more expansive. It's become a lot more grounded, a lot more about being rather than doing, or making sure I am being if I am doing. And a lot of that I learned from that emotionally healthy spirituality stuff that Pete and Jerry Scazzaro put out in the world. So I have to give a nod there for their work. And then also just work by different thought leaders in this space. I think about Richard Rohr, or I don't know, a lot. There's a lot of them there in Richard Rohr's center that I've read or listened to. A lot of the spiritual directors in my life have been very helpful in widening my ability to be rather than to just do or to just learn. So that's what I want the next phase of my journey to be about. I mean, that kind of hit the wall dark night of the soul place is a very real place you can be. It feels so terrible, but it actually was maybe the doorway in my journey that helped me move to a place that I don't want to go back from. So for any of the people listening that are in that space where you're hitting the wall with your faith journey or just in your life, That's again when people come to see me in my work, and that's a space that I think is beautiful and holy and totally a part of the journey. But a lot of
Yeah.
people don't understand it, and I think it feels like scary to maybe people who haven't hit it. Maybe
Mm.
people say you're backsliding if you're questioning, but questions are the
Yeah.
birthplace, I think, for new growth. And so I'm not afraid of that space. And that's also been really helpful in my journey, being in that space and also moving through that space. So I guess
Yeah.
there's that piece. Boy,
Yeah.
that was a
No.
really long, winding answer, wasn't it, to your
That's a
question?
no. Again, it's a profound answer because and that's really helpful for anyone listening. As Christian or not, but probably definitely Christians as well. Um, Reaching the end of the old can feel like the end, but actually
Mm-hmm.
it's the beginning of something new.
Mm-hmm.
But there's that transition. There's that transition piece, and it's not necessarily. It's not familiar. There are questions, there are doubts,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it is unsettling. But
Yeah.
something better is around the corner.
Yeah.
Something better, and I just can't help think of the old well-used metaphor of the butterfly.
Yeah. Oh,
You
right.
know,
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and that
Yeah. I
chrysalis
think something
place.
I say a lot is, especially because I have people who find me a lot in this space, right?
Mm,
As a therapist or a coach mentor. One thing I say a lot is that, faith by its very nature means there will be doubt.
interesting.
And so doubt is not a problem.
Yeah,
Doubt is
yeah,
is beautiful. Doubt is an invitation.
yeah.
And I
I love
think a
that.
lot of people in dualistic systems have not heard that before. They feel like it's
Mm,
bad or I must be doing something wrong if I'm having pain or doubt.
yeah,
And that's just not true. It's a
yeah.
part of the journey. And some I don't know if um I don't know if everybody makes it to that part. I mean, I don't know. I'm surrounded by a lot of people who doubt, like some good, strong doubters,
Yeah.
and very strong faith in that group, in many ways. And so maybe it's too scary for some. Maybe people feel silenced in that space, so they're there but they can't talk about it, or maybe they're in that space but they just don't know where to look for answers. And I think, people who are on the journey ahead of you, just find the people on the journey ahead of you, or find the people who aren't afraid to ask the hard questions.
Mm,
That's where you'll probably find some people who are more able to handle the doubts, the questions, the things that don't feel so good inside. I guess I wish I would.
mm,
I guess I found people actually mostly via books at that point in my journey, because I didn't know a lot of real people that
mm.
had hit that space in the circles I was in. Um, but you can find direction in that space. This is not an all
Yeah,
hope is lost space. It's actually an exciting space from my perspective, but I guess that's a little bit in it a little bit more. I found that space. Then the beginning was hard. The hitting the
yeah,
wall was hard. It hurt.
yeah. It isn't a pleasant journey, and I think
Um,
one thing I was trained in with spiritual direction is the stages
mm.
of faith. It's not like
Oh
it's
yes.
just a way of
Exactly.
understanding it. And so I think people maybe on earlier stages, or another way of wording it is when the personality is working,
Hmm.
there isn't a problem.
There isn't.
But
No.
when it stops working, whether
Yes.
it's professionally or personally, however it stops working, and
Yes.
then it is a problem, and then
Yeah.
it's like, okay, so now I've hit a wall, and
Hmm.
so that's when the journey inward can begin. And when people are at that place, I think
Yeah.
they're more open to the Enneagram, because it is a tool, as you know, that can
Hmm.
help us explore our internal reality.
Yes.
Um, and so maybe it's when the fruit is ripe, it can be picked.
Right.
You know,
Good metaphor. You're right.
yeah,
Hmm.
another bit.
Yeah. Right.
And I also thought it was interesting whether you're doing this deliberately or not. But you used, when I was asking you about your subtype of social
Hmm.
seven, as you'll know, it's got the name sacrifice, and you used the
Yeah.
word sacrifice a few
Yeah.
times, and
I
that's
did.
exactly what the social seven is doing: is sacrificing themselves and with the social dominance, that God complex, playing God. And I was almost like seeing like somebody in that personality almost so busy trying to be God and play God. And on the outside, the behavior is maybe I'd admire, people might look at their behavior and go, wow, isn't that person doing great works? And
Yeah.
to a point, maybe, yeah, maybe they are.
Mhm.
But then I can almost imagine God was going like, where are you? Like,
Right.
where are you? I'm trying to love you. I'm trying to have a relationship with you, but you're too busy pretending to be me.
Yes.
you know,
Right. Yep. I think,
and it's
yeah,
like
it's spot
and
on.
a completely disconnect, a complete disconnect. And
Mhm.
what a relief to go, ah, phew, I'm not God.
Not me, right? It's not all on me.
It's not
You
all
don't
on me.
you
What a
don't realize
relief.
what a weight it is until you realize you're carrying it, I think.
Yeah,
And then there's
yeah.
the freedom of not carrying it
The
anymore.
true freedom.
Realizing it's not on me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the freedom that you've mentioned that the sevens are looking for don't really get to experience the real freedom of that letting go of that personality pattern, or being more in touch with the different centers, the heart center, body center, being more connected to
Yeah.
their, you know, to God, however they understand God.
Right.
You know,
Right.
as you
Yeah.
said earlier, the fourth wisdom.
Yeah, the fourth wisdom, the spiritual. Yeah.
Yeah. So
You're
Rachel,
really
I
good
know
at like summing things up well.
that.
You should be
uh,
answering the questions now.
um, so Rachel, I know that you also work professionally with the Enneagram from what you've
I
shared.
do.
Um, can you share more about what it is that you do, what you have to offer, and where people can find out more about your work so they can get
Sure.
in touch with you?
Yes. Okay, I am a therapist, marriage and family therapist, and I work with individuals and couples and families. However, to be a client, you have to live in Minnesota. The laws are
Okay.
interesting that way. So to be a therapy client, you have to live in Minnesota. My license is in Minnesota. I do some coaching and some mentoring with the Enneagram. And so for that, you can live anywhere. I do love being in person with people, but sometimes that's not so practical. So I do some of my work online. Right now, we are in an expansion. This is part of my owning myself and my power, but not playing God. And so you can find us two different places. Me personally, probably the easiest way to find me and read about me as a person or how I work is through blueturtlescounseling.com. That's our therapy website. There's a contact form on there, my email's on there, my cell phone's on there, so you can find me there. Our brand new expansion is called blueturtlesartandwellness.com. And we are
Hmm.
growing our therapy office into an art and wellness center. So we're in the middle of getting permits and such to be
Wow.
able to have a clay studio and an art studio. We're also going to have a side that's more about movement and meditation. We've got a little lounge for our friends who are writers and just need a space to sit and write and get their work into the world. That's right now in an idea phase. I do have space, and like I said, we're in the hurry up and wait phase on permitting and things so we can start to move and take down a couple walls, put in a kiln, things like that. So that is blueturtlesartandwellness.com. And like I said, where the bios of me and how I work are blueturtlescounseling.com. Both of those you'll be able to find me and find my contact. And I love to work
Mm.
with people. But you can see how owning my power has allowed me to kind of expand, but also I'm expanding into a space I think is so important, and that is balancing our centers, right? Therapy can be about the head, but it also is about the heart and the gut. And our Western culture is all about our heads, right? Be logical, think it through.
Mm.
Even our heart types and my body types think that they have to solve all their problems with their head. And that's cultural. And so I'm trying to build a center where we do address the head, but we're also addressing like how do we get into our bodies? How do we get into our hearts? How do all those things come together? And I found one of the spaces they come together is in the arts. And in movement practices, or, like massage practices, or just anything that brings us deeper into our systems, breath,
Mm.
all the things. So I'm just trying to build a space where we can address more of that. And so I'm very, very excited, but I'm in that hurry up and wait phase. That's hard for 7 because I just want to move. I just want to like tear out carpet. Just want to paint, and I can't
That
yet.
sounds that sounds so exciting. I wish I lived locally because I would be coming to visit.
Well, you could come to Minnesota. We'd be happy to have you come visit. So let me
Thank you.
know if you are coming over this way.
If I'm ever
And
in
I think
the
I'll be in the
neighborhood,
UK next year, so maybe maybe we can see each other then
that'd be
in
lovely
real life.
in person. But yeah, thank you
Mhm.
for sharing that. I'm going to put links in the description box
Okay,
to what you shared,
well,
so
that's
people can
really
just
sweet of you.
click straight there and people can go and find you.
Yeah,
Is
thanks.
there anything else you'd like to add that I might not have asked that you'd like to share about the
Mm.
Enneagram, your experience with it, subtypes and things?
Um, well, we hit so much, Matt. I think just to realize that all growth, it just happens in bits and pieces,
Yeah.
and it happens in moments. And we don't have to like seek the great arc. I think it will find us if we're open. I've seen that in my family, I've seen that in my relationship, I see that in my clients, that so many times I think we think, oh, I'm not growing or I'm not moving. And yet day to day it's maybe hard to see. But if you look at the arc, you can see it. And so
Yeah.
it really is about those small movements, those steps, those awarenesses. It's just about building a bit at a time. And I'm at a space now I think I never would have dreamed of in 2008.
Wow. Okay.
But it's just been these little builds, these little, like I said, gifts in the spirit that notices different things. Like I can probably trace the books and the people that have spoken into me all along the way. And there's still so much, I still see how my ego drives so much. I mean, it's like I'm giving you, the good answers. And I still see how this day in my daily life, I'm still in the midst of the battle, just like everybody else. But the arc, looking back, I'm like, oh, this growth thing is real. The spirit's real. The inner wisdom, the outer wisdom, it's all real. We just need to just follow the little breadcrumbs. And
Yeah.
so I just want to encourage people to just do that. What's the next breadcrumb? I mean, that's easy. We can do a breadcrumb, right? I mean, we could do just a little tiny baby step, because there's just so much that we'll be able to encounter. And so just do the steps. Keep going.
Yeah.
Um, family wise, I'd say use all the knowledge you have. Use it in your relationships. I mean, we don't want to be typing our 6-year-old, maybe, but we do want to be watching. We want to say, wow, it seems like that's super important to you. Oh, I really see this in you. Wow, that's kind of like this type. Ooh, and I'm so glad I can see that type in you, right? It's a
Yeah.
building of awareness for them, helping them see who they are, reflecting back to them, attuning with them. I mean, it can be
Mm.
used so many spaces. I just encourage people to play, to use it, see
Yeah.
where it leads you. And like you said, if it's not true, it won't work. It's kind of self validating, way, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it.
Abs- but Rachel, thank you so much for sharing all that you've shared and for showing up
You're welcome.
real and just being real with the journey of self-awareness and the journey of where it's a this whole growth thing is a lifelong journey, and I think that you've
Mm,
testified to that with
mm,
confidence and vulnerability and just
mm.
as a professional and personally. So thank you so much for
Thank
sharing
you
all
for
that.
having me. Thank you for asking me to share. I so enjoy you. It's been
Thank
so
you.
fun.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing what you've shared. It's been really insightful. All the best.